Welcome to the Remembering a Life podcast. I'm your host, Holly Ignatowski, and today we're talking with Dr. Barry Baines, author of Ethical Wills, Putting Your Values on Paper. We've all heard of having a last will and testament, and most of us have heard of living wills. Today we're going to talk about ethical wills, something with which many of us may not be familiar. Ethical wills are a unique yet simple way of putting our values on paper and leaving a legacy for our family and friends. Welcome, Dr. Baines, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Holly. It's a pleasure to be on your podcast show today.
Ethical wills are more than just recording Grandma while she tells stories. Can you talk about how did the concept of ethical wills begin?
Sure. It's a very rich tradition that actually goes back several thousands of years. The first recording of what's felt to be an ethical will, also known as a legacy letter, is in the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible when Jacob gathers his children around his bedside before he passes on and sort of talks about blessings, instructions, some commands. He scolds a few of his sons for some of the things that they did as well. But it was his legacy to his kids. And then as we move forward in the Christian Bible, the New Testament, John chapter 15, when Jesus gathers his disciples before his death. And again, a similar kind of theme with blessings, commands, advice, instructions, things like that. So it's a tradition that goes back a long ways. And obviously it started off in a more oral tradition. And then over time, as writing became more commonplace, people began to write these as documents. Oftentimes they kept them with their legal wills. I know we'll be talking a little bit more about the differentiation between the two, but they were kept with their legal wills, even though they're not a legal document. And then over time they became separated. And so it's pretty much a freestanding document these days. And it's not only written. We'll hopefully have an opportunity to talk about the different ways that people sort of record this kind of information for their family, friends, and community. So that's the short take on the history.
You mentioned legal wills. We also brought up living wills. Can you talk about the similarities and differences between, say, a living will and an ethical will?
Sure. So the living will is really a way for people to talk about their wishes as they approach the end part of their life, how they want to be, treatments and kept comfortable, things like that. That is a legal document, a living will. Ethical will is more passing on values, life lessons, hopes, speaking about love, gratitude, forgiveness, people's beliefs and faith. So between a living will and an ethical will, again, one is considered a legal document, as is your will of inheritance or last will and testament, as some people might be familiar with. And the ethical will is not a legal document. In fact, that's one of the confusing things for people when they hear the term ethical will. They may be confused about, well, what exactly does that mean? I'm hoping that with our podcast today that we'll make all of your listeners total experts on defining ethical wills, or also known as legacy letters, and what they mean.
So let's do that. So this is not a living will. It's not a power of attorney. It's not a declaration or of distribution of financial or other assets. So it's not a last will and testament. You say it's not a legal document. So then how is it preserved or shared?
Typically, people, I would say, writing it as a document, a love letter from the heart, as it were, and people just share it with family, friends, and community when they feel it's appropriate, to do so. It's also more of a living document in that you might be writing down things at one time, and it's a document that you can come back and revisit. It's more, I would say, of a process rather than just, I finished my ethical will, I wrote down these things, and that's the end of that. Because depending when people actually put pen to paper or pencil to paper or use some of our modern technology to accomplish the same things. It's a document that continues to change over time as we have different life experiences and as we face our own challenges. So it is more of a living document that can change.
What inspired you to focus on teaching others the value of an ethical will?
I'll give the short story. I'm a family physician by training and have been working in end-of-life care as a hospice medical director for more than 25 years. And this is actually about 25 years ago now. We were at one of our team meetings in hospice, and our chaplain told us about a younger man in his late 40s who unfortunately had pancreatic cancer and did not have a lot of time left. And this patient, his name was Dennis, told our chaplain that he was having such spiritual suffering, like 10 out of 10, like the worst you could possibly imagine. And when our chaplain asked him more about it, this man said, well, I feel like I'm going to die and pass on, and there'll be no record that I was ever around, sort of like the first wave will come in and my footprints will be washed off the sand, as it were. And this is a man, he had 2 younger children. He was married. He loved his family very much, but he didn't see himself as overly successful in his life. He didn't have a lot of education. His jobs were not the high-paying jobs, and so he was very concerned about that. When we talked about this at our team meeting, I had remembered literally 10 years earlier that I read about this idea called an ethical will, where instead of bequeathing your valuables as you would in a will of inheritance, you actually can bequeath your values. And so our team, similar to going into a store where they have a little sign, you break it, you bought it, at our team meeting, it's sort of like you said it, you own it. So after our team meeting, I got together with our chaplain, and we called some of the questions that potentially could be asked of this young man. When the chaplain went to offer this idea to him, Dennis sort of grabbed onto this the way a drowning person would really grab onto a life preserver. He said he was very interested. He knew he didn't have a lot of time left. And, well, Phil took about an hour with him, served as his scribe, and just asked him these different questions about values, life lessons, what he hopes for his family in the future, things like that. And as soon as he was done writing these things down on a sheet of paper, Dennis turned to him and said, you know, Phil, that suffering I told you about that was really causing me a lot of anguish, he said, it's completely gone. I really feel like I'm leaving something of myself behind so that I could be remembered in a very tangible way. When Phil reported back at our next team meeting, all of us were like, totally amazed and at how something that seemed to be so simple could have such a tremendous impact. So I just took the ball from there, started to develop some resources for how we could do this more with our hospice patients. And it didn't take long before it was very obvious that this, while it's very important at the end of life where there's really the urgency is high and there may not be a lot of time left, it's something that as you get upstream with this, you could write an ethical will or legacy letter really any time in your life, really starting as early as in your late teens, all the way on up till whenever. And the earlier that you tend to write this kind of thing and reflect on it does help you to live actually a lot more intentionally as well, because you do have time. Although, obviously none of us is promised tomorrow, of course, but we, sort of live our life in the present and wonder about the future and also think about the past. So this is a great way to just put that all together. But it was that hospice work and the impact it had on this one man that was really just so remarkable, and that just got me going, and I still have that enthusiasm. You can probably tell in my voice when I talk about this topic, something that I've been doing now for over 25 years, and I hope to continue working in this area as well. Hope that helps.
It does help. In your book, you do explore all the different reasons for writing an ethical will, and that was one very good example. What are some other reasons, and can you get specific on some of the topics that are covered in an ethical will?
Absolutely. So what I'd like to do is sort of establish first what I consider my definition of what an ethical will is. And this is the part where once you get this, then you're like an expert. So it's a way to pass on values, beliefs, faith, life lessons, hopes for the future, blessings for your family and friends and community, love, gratitude, and forgiveness. And so those tend to be the main topics that are included. If you were to say, well, what are the, sort of the top three, of those, I would say people really tend to address things that they learn from life, so their life lessons, certainly their values and what's important to them as a person, what provides meaning for them. Moving forward. Those are probably the top two. And also people talk a lot about their faith and beliefs as well as something that sustains them. But I sort of gave you the bigger list. I would say in general, people don't write about every single one of those in an ethical will, but they tend to address most of those things in some way.
And for the most part, it's a pretty open-ended structure, although you do have an ethical will resource kit, which I would like you to talk about a little bit. But when does an ethical will, or can an ethical will, become unethical?
Yes, that's an excellent question. Like most things, everything has a little bit of a dark side, and an ethical will can be used in a negative way. And this is something that I just caution people to be thinking about. That sometimes people write this as a way to, scold others, to sort of try and script other people's lives, almost like a reaching out from the grave, as it were. I think ethical wills are more, certainly today, seen as more of a love letter from the heart rather than, kind of this way of trying to control other people's lives by writing some of these things down. And there's an easy way to sort of tell when you read it. You'll have a lot of you shoulds in it and trying to tell other people what to do. There's another book written back in 1987 called So That Your Values Live On by Jack Reamer and Nathaniel Stamfer, and there was one paragraph or one sentence from that always stuck with me, is that when people write this, they should think, well, I want to have a vote in the future, but not a veto. And the negative side, again, is that veto of trying to control people a little bit too much really reflects more on that negative aspect of it. I would say overwhelmingly, quite honestly, Holly, in the years that I've been working with people with this, along with other people that I've trained to bring this out to their community, it's overwhelmingly positive. And the people that receive it they receive such a treasure that they just relish it. I know I've got my dad, before he passed away, he's been gone now for 30 years, to write something down, and I could tell you every year on the anniversary of his death, I kind of pick it up and read it, and it's just like his voice jumps off the paper. And it's just like he's there. So, again, there is that downside to it. I think for the most part, people like to focus on some of the more positive things.
That is a beautiful gift to have. And you do have a resource kit, so if people don't know where to begin or how to write an ethical will, you help them through that. So talk about that, and also what is the most important thing people should keep in mind when they are writing an ethical will?
Okay. So I have created several resources to help guide people through the process. The Ethical Will Resource Kit is one of the early versions of resources, and I think, as you'll probably talk about later, my book, Ethical Wills, Putting Your Values on Paper, is much more comprehensive and also easy to read and has a lot of examples of ethical wills in them so that people can, sort of look at that. But the basic process is just to identify some questions or prompts to get you thinking. And once you start thinking, then you could start putting these things down on paper. And when you're going through the process itself, I think it's important to understand that you don't have to just sit down and do it all at once. It's something that you can reflect on and really take some time to do it. In terms of actual time, I would say most people probably have a pretty good draft done in about probably 3 to 4 hours. I've also had reports from people that they really start to get into this and can spend a lot more time on it. That being said, I would say the average ethical will or legacy letter tends to be maybe 2 to 4 pages. So it's not like you're writing your autobiography or anything like that. It's much more brief, much more succinct, and much more portable as well.
You talk about the different stages of readiness that people go through when creating an ethical will. When should people start thinking about writing an ethical will? Is it ever too soon? And are there any rules on how often you can update it?
Oh, definitely no rules on when you can update these things. It's totally individual. That's one of the nice things, even though there are very much things in common for themes that people write about. It's unique. Every single one of them is unique. As far as when people write, traditionally people would sort of do this on their deathbed, and in some ways that's sort of, where the hospice piece, because of that urgency, was there. But what I found is the biggest factor in motivating people is some transition in their life, whether it be retirement, birth of a child or grandchild. It might be actually in the face of some of the natural disasters and national disasters that we seem to be facing, where it gives people pause to stop and reflect and think about it. Certainly changes in life conditions, illness, things like that, does get us, thinking a little bit more. And then I always like to put in when the spirit moves you is another good way. So my hope would be that your listeners, in hearing our conversation, might say, I wonder what that would be about. Maybe I should give it a go. And it is really fairly easy. People don't need to be, Pulitzer Prize, authors to be able to write this. It's so much the voice of the heart, and that always comes through. And I just think anytime people get some kind of inspiration for doing this is a great time to start. Oftentimes I hear reports that people always say, I wish I started doing this earlier. And again, when you want to revisit it after a period of time, that's just totally up to you. And I do advocate for just adding to your ethical will rather than trying to change it and revise it, because it's nice to see the personal growth and personal changes that we go through as we get older and as we experience new things.
So, Dr. Baines, obviously the concept of ethical wills and the ideas in this book have true staying power. But if you were to write an addendum in today's technology-focused world, is there anything that you would add about how to create an ethical will?
That's another great question. Obviously, technology has changed. I think less people are comfortable with writing. One of the things that I did with my business partner in our Celebrations of Life, Living Wisely organization, is that we did take the same content and created it as an online option for people so that people can actually certainly, do keyboarding if they want. They can use their smartphone, their computer, their tablet, or they could do voice transcription. So the technology addendum that I would add to this is that it's become so portable. And oftentimes we get ideas, we might be just taking a walk around the block and think of something, and you could just, sort of take your technology that you have in your pocket and just record something so that you have it. And so you can do this in really short little bites rather than having to just sit down and feel like it might be a burden to have to spend a lot of time. You can sort of do it as the ideas come to you. And the whole idea is as long as you capture those things, then it will be available. And that would be the addendum. I think it's interesting when I think about the technology for getting this done, although that has changed, the ideas that people write about, the things that they reflect on, tend to be the same. And I think the reason for that, Holly, is that humans have this transcendent dimension, and I'll define that for folks, and that is that we're the only species that sort of realize that life goes on after, we're out of the picture, that life continues, and all of us want to be remembered in some way. And we all leave something behind, whether we plan for it or not. And what I always like to say is the ethical will is a great way to be more proactive about, how you're remembered. It's also a way to honor your past. Many of us are curious about where we come from. Certainly capturing the present is important, knowing where we are today. And many of us are curious about the future, what's going to happen in the future, whether we're going to be there or not. And we'd like to have at least a voice so that we are remembered.
Dr. Baines, do people generally write just one ethical will that's shared with multiple people, their whole family, or can you write individual ethical wills tailored to specific people?
Again, another great question. So my experience has been that people do it both ways. They either will create, a common ethical will and then share that. In doing that, though, they also will tend to personalize it a little bit, because I get that question at some workshops as well. I have, 3 kids. Do I just give them the same one? Well, certainly some of the basic things like values and life lessons, one would hope that those would be fairly consistent for each of the people that you're sharing it with. That said, when you receive this document, people like to hear about what you meant personally to that person, and so most people will have like a common base of that they give to everybody, but then have some personal reflections in it as well. Separately, people can again just write it, one for everybody. That works. And again, that's what I like about this, is that it's not like there's a right way of doing it and a wrong way of doing it. It's sort of whatever feels right. And in fact, I just heard just the other day from a person who decided to do their ethical will. What they created was a quilt for each of their grandkids. And in the middle of the quilt, they have kind of quilted in. I'm not good at sewing, so don't know exactly how you do that, but right in the middle of the quilt, they put down a list of their values that they thought were important and wanted their grandkids to know about it. So people use mixed, I guess, is that called mixed media, or whatever, different ways. It doesn't just have to be a document. I think certainly a number of people do it on video as well, so that they have not only a voice, but you can see the person. I guess in some ways I'm a little old-fashioned, that I would say do it however you want, and then the insurance should be having it written as well, because that writing has endured for a long time, and so you might be insured of preservation, where we don't know how technology changes. That's the thing I worry about. If you do it in a particular way and then technology changes, do you wind up losing it?
I love the idea of a quilted will. That's beautiful. That has staying power as well.
I heard that. Yeah, I heard that. I said, wow, that's something.
Amazing. How does an ethical will help us remember the lives of our loved ones?
I think the best way of thinking about that is it's such a tangible connection to that person, because you actually have this, in my case, like I mentioned about my dad, I actually have this piece of paper that he wrote on. Actually, it was my mother who wrote it. I kind of got a twofer on that one, because my dad was, toward the end, really wasn't able to write much, and so my mom kind of took that over. So I have his words in her handwriting on a piece of paper. And again, this tangible connection, you just feel it's such a strong emotional thing. I'll be honest, is that when I take it out to read it, I usually read it on the anniversary of his death. It's always a good idea to have a box of Kleenex nearby because, the tears usually flow, and that is just, those are good tears. They're good tears. And so it's just that strong connection that you have when you hear these words from the person that created it. And oftentimes a lot of the values and things that we incorporate in our lives usually come from parents, grandparents, aunts and uncles, friends, and other folks. So it does create this, again, the tangible connection piece is the main point that I like to talk about. And in doing that, that's, sort of how we honor the life of people that we loved. It's our way of remembering them. And so in some ways, they live on forever. Obviously, in our memory, it's a different relationship if they're gone, but they're ever present. And oftentimes it can be very comforting for people as well.
You talk about reading your father's ethical will on the anniversary every year. Is this something that's only read after the author is deceased, or could it be incorporated into something perhaps like a eulogy?
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, there are a number of people that use that as a base for their eulogy because they've really taken the time to think about how they want to be remembered. And most people actually share this document before they're gone, so that it actually can offer some chance for healing with, let's say, some estranged relationships. But it also opens up conversation because you write these things, you start reading it, and invariably people say, oh, I never knew that. And so if the person is still here, you can start engaging in more conversation. But as far back to that eulogy piece, it's oftentimes a great way to have that incorporated in, certainly within, end of life and funerals and stuff. It's nice to hear the actual words from the person, who walked upon the earth and is no longer with us, to hear, some of what they have to say.
Dr. Baines, who are you remembering today?
Well, today I'm remembering my mother-in-law, Sophie. She died 3 months ago, and it's interesting because one of the things that she did to ensure her legacy, she did not, again, used writing her ethical will in a different kind of way. For her, cooking was always very important, and how she ensured her legacy of what was important is that all of her recipes, she taught all of her kids and grandchildren how to make her favorite recipes. So obviously she's gone, like I say, just 3 months, so she's very much in our thoughts. And coming up on different family traditions and holidays, we know we're always going to be using Sophie's recipes that she taught everybody how to cook, including me. Although, I know my kids do a lot better with those recipes, so I just enjoy, watching them make either pastries or main dishes and stuff. And this is how Bubby did it. That was the name that they had for her. And so that's who I'm thinking about today. I'm thinking about Sophie and all the goodness that she shared with the many people in her life that she touched. She was almost 98. She died a few months before her 98th birthday.
Wow. That's a beautiful legacy, especially at dinner time.
Absolutely. A delicious legacy, yes, as they say.
Yes. Thank you so much for joining me today, Dr. Baines, and introducing so many of us to perhaps new to us concept of ethical wills and how they help us remember a life.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure to have this conversation with you, Holly. I really appreciate it.
And thanks to all of you for joining me today. To enter to win a copy of the book Ethical Wills, Putting Your Values on Paper, visit rememberingalife.com/giveaways.